I'm Monty Nero, creator of Death Sentence and Chrome Roses, and this is the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Monty Nero about the hardcover edition of Death Sentence from Titan Comics, working in Vancouver, and more. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Based in Scotland, Monty Nero is a writer and artist published by Marvel for X-Men and Hulk, Titan Publishing, Delcourt, DC, and 2000 AD. He also has self-published 3 popular books in his Death Sentence series and 18 top-selling comics since 2010. His artwork, words, or character concepts have enlivened games from Sony, Lego, Bethesda, and Electronic Arts during his temporary residence in Vancouver, British Columbia. His writing has been described as easily the equal of Dostoevsky or Dickens, says Pop Matters, and work that ranks up there with greats such as Alan Moore and Warren Ellis, according to How to Love Comics. Monty has published academic papers on comics and pulp culture and was awarded a master's with distinction from Dundee University, where he won an academic prize. His latest project is the hardcover collection of Death Sentence. Death Sentence is a story of 3 people who've contracted the G+ virus, an infectious agent that gives you incredible powers before killing you. What will struggling graphic designer Verity, failing indie guitarist Weasel, and roguish media personality Monty do in time that remains? Fade away or go out in a blaze of glory? And if they choose to kick back, will there be anything left of the world when they're through? From the streets of London to the North Atlantic, from intimate betrayals to the death of thousands, from muses lost and futures thrown away to the fall of society. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Monty Nero about the hardcover edition of Death Sentence from Titan Comics, working in Vancouver, and more. So, Monty Nero, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy fellow. Before I get going with all the questions, I would like to know, what was the first comic book that you read?
Ooh, good question. Started off with Buster and the Beano, which are kind of juvenile titles. And then used to draw the pictures out of those. Then I don't know if you're familiar with Asterix the Goal, which is very big in France and also across Europe and in Britain also. So they'd be translated from French, and they were very they're cartoony, but they're very sophisticated, with a lot of jokes, for adults and for kids. So I used to really like reading those, and my dad used to like reading them as well, and I like the fact that he also enjoyed them. There's actually a lot of very quite sophisticated kind of sequential techniques in Asterix the Goal, and you just absorb those without thinking, don't you, when you're a kid? And I often find myself, I think I've done something clever or interesting in a comic, and then I'll think, oh, hold on a minute, no, that's just Asterix the Goal, isn't it? You know what I mean? So I think that was the earliest ones I remember.
Very good, very good. Well, great stuff when you're growing up, but I'm wondering, who or what inspires you to create today?
These days, it's just very much exploring my own personality and expressing myself through the comics, and also just constantly trying to find new ways of doing things. I'm very interested in the kind of formal properties of comics and how they work, as well as just telling a good story. So in all my comics, you'll find some really interesting kind of storytelling techniques. I try and make them unobtrusive so you don't really notice them. I think a good story, you should just really be engrossed in the story and not be taken too far outside it by something tricksy. But under the hood, as it were, I'm always doing interesting new things or trying to find new ways of doing things visually, or, the combination of words and image. So that keeps me motivated. I guess when I started to get into making comics, I guess I was just very inspired by, the great graphic novels of my sort of teens, which would be, your Watchmen and your V for Vendetta, Posey Simmons in the paper, her graphic novels, books like that.
No, classic stuff, that's for sure. Now, people will probably be wondering
why am I talking to a fellow from Scotland, a creator?
Uh-huh.
But you alerted me to the fact that you reside in Vancouver for many years. So I wanted to
Yeah.
ask you, what were you doing during that time? What were you up to?
I used to make computer games. I wanted to be a comic artist. So I practiced comic art in my teens and learned how to do it. And I used to go to this place called the London Cartoon Centre in London and get lessons every week off David Lloyd, who did V for Vendetta. So he would basically give us a script every week and we'd have to draw it. And then he'd sort of basically rip it to shreds. Which is
Wow.
a very good way of learning. I mean, he was incredibly generous with his time, but he didn't mince his words at all. So the first thing I really realized was how crap I was and how much I had to learn. So that was a good lesson at a young age. And then obviously I learned a lot doing that. And I started to get work, drawing comics and, work for hire stuff. And it was very disappointing. It was nothing like I'd imagined. There was no kind of creative kind of meeting of minds. There was no kind of commitment to make the work excellent. It was very much like this atmosphere that comics were shrinking, comics were dying. No one was really that bothered to sort of draw something. Then I'd meet the writer and he wouldn't even remember, writing the script or something. So it was just quite dispiriting. So at the same time, I noticed that the computer game section in the sort of comic racks, even all the newsagents I went into, was getting bigger and bigger. And I thought, like, well, this is basically the same artwork. So I sort of started sending off my portfolio to these computer game companies, and then I started getting concept work, which was just ridiculously well paid at the time. And then I got hired full time. Then I figured out how to use the 3D software and the animation tools. And at that stage, if you were an artist that could do that, that was quite rare. So I got on quite well in computer games, and I was sort of leading art teams and managing teams, and sort of could do all the disciplines, whether it was two-dimensional textures or 3D modeling or animation. And that's how I ended up coming to Canada, because there's a lot of computer games in Vancouver. Specifically, there's all the sort of electronic arts sports games were based in Vancouver. So they'd had this purpose-built campus where they did FIFA and NBA and the hockey and Need for Speed and all these games. I worked there for years and really enjoyed that. I worked on a snowboarding game, so designed the characters for that. SSX, it was called. Went snowboarding all year, which was great because it was free, because they wanted us to sort of embrace the culture, so they gave us sort of passes. And then Need for Speed, I worked on one of those as well, which was less kind of challenging because it was less character based. I was very much sort of character specialist. And then I was hired to be lead artist on FIFA, but that's when I decided to come back to the UK because my wife was missing her family, basically.
Well, we have to thank you for your efforts there, especially in this household. SSX and Need for Speed are two big popular games, so got to thank you for your efforts there. And glad that you returned to comic book creation, and that's what we're turning to now, the focus of this discussion.
Yeah, I was living in Vancouver, and I started sort of getting into writing. I was writing sort of screenplays and trying to get into sort of doing comics and stuff. So I was very much working as a writer at that time. So I didn't start drawing the comics till later. And then I got some work working for Marvel, did some X-Men stuff and the Hulk, which was really exciting, the Hulk. So I thought, right, what can I do? What can I do with the Hulk? And obviously, to me, the great excitement of the Hulk is you want him to smash stuff up. I mean, the Bruce Banner stuff is just sort of the tease, and then the Hulk losing his temper and smashing the hell out of something is really what we've all come to see, I think. You've got to find a good story and character motivations and stuff, but basically that's what I wanted to see in a Hulk comic. So I was literally just looking out my window. I was in this condo in sort of Cole Harbour in Vancouver, and I was thinking, like, what can I get the Hulk to do? So basically, I was just using what I could see out the window, and I'm looking out at Grouse Mountain, and I'm looking out at the Lionsgate Bridge, and I just wrote this fantastic action scene where the Hulk is whacking people over the head with the bridge, and then he picks up the mountain and he throws it at somebody, and all this kind of stuff. And it was just really cathartic, really fun stuff, just to sort of destroy Vancouver whilst writing, one of my favorite characters. And I think if you get the chance, to me, it wasn't my ambition to sort of write that kind of stuff. But I loved those characters when I was a kid. And I think if you get the chance to do it, you just want to do it in a way that you love and that it sort of expresses what your love for that character is. So I did that with all the characters I got a chance to write. With the X-Men, I actually managed to get my daughter and my sister into the script as sort of very minor characters in the Marvel Universe. And the idea being that there's all this kind of X-Men kind of battle, stuff going on. But these two characters are kind of running around New York trying to meet the X-Men, and they keep just missing them because there's all this kind of violence and, the normal kind of X-Men kind of stuff going on. And it gets right to the end of the comic and you think, oh, they've missed them and they've wasted their whole day in New York. And then they have this very poignant final meeting with Storm, who sort of sees what they've done and sort of comes to see them, and it's just like a touching end. The story is called Why I Love the X-Men. That was a shorter one, actually. It was in an annual, but it's definitely my favourite that I wrote, X-Men story, and also seemed to be the most popular with the readers as well. I think that's the key to comics, is just sort of just transmit your excitement for the medium and the characters that you've got the privilege to write. So that's what I always try to do with my own characters or with somebody else's.
Can you talk about your latest projects that you have on the go? What's just been released or about to be released?
Titan have just collected Death Sentence, the complete edition in hardback. That's a comic that I created with Mike Dowling. He's a brilliant artist. He's now working for Marvel on sort of Spider-Man titles. And also, when Mike moved on, Martin Simmons did the artwork for half the book. So it's 470 pages altogether. And Martin did 9 issues. Mike did 6 issues, the first 6 issues. And then I did the final 3 issues, because by that time I'd figured out how to sort of combine the writing and the drawing in an effective way. I find that works really well, just because you can be much more fluid with your storytelling if you know the script, and then you're also placing the balloons, and then you're also doing the artwork. You can just make the storytelling a lot more impactful and sort of flow really nicely. And that's what I really enjoy about comics, is getting that really nice flow and kind of stimulating storytelling technique on every sort of panel and page. Mike and Martin are both geniuses. The one thing we had at the time was just commitment to make it just an excellent comic in terms of how well the story was told and sort of the attention to detail in every panel. And you don't often get that with comics, because they're just churned out so quickly. So it really stands the test of time. So I'm delighted that Titan have collected it into this wonderful, beautiful hardback, which has also got loads of extra kind of bonus materials in it, like various forwards, putting it into context. There's an article about designing the characters in the world and how that all came together. There's all the cover galleries, and we've got some covers from Ben Oliver and Luke Ross and people like that. Yeah, it's a really beautiful book.
Yeah, that's great when it's all collected and you can proudly present it on your bookshelf. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned you have another project as well?
Yeah, that's right. I've been working on Chrome Roses, which is a cyberpunk book, which I'm really excited about. There was various reasons why I wanted to do that book. But one reason was I was in a quite serious high-speed motorway crash. It was very stressful, and the car was written off, and there was a lot of insurance problems that followed on from that, and it was just a very stressful time. And without even thinking about it, I found myself just drawing these very imaginative cyberpunk worlds and cities and characters and, hover ships and, robot men and detectives and all these sort of characters. And it was very much like a coping mechanism and just sort of calming my mind and calming my body down. And then, like I say, I wasn't doing it consciously. It was just what I'd end up doing all day while I was dealing with all this other crap, which went on for 9 months until we actually managed to get some money for the car smash and buy a new car, which is what we needed as a family. During this whole period, I was drawing this cyberpunk stuff, and it was also, I'd been drawing my more recent comics digitally. I found that I just didn't want to do that anymore, and I did it all with pens and pencils and ink and airbrush. So it's got a very distinctive hand-drawn feel to it. The thing I like about cyberpunk is you've obviously got the conventions of the noir shadows and the sort of dystopian kind of vapor-filled cityscapes and neon lights. But I wanted to bring something new to that. So by using this sort of technique and some of the tools and the ideas that I've got as a writer about this world and how it works, which we might be able to go into some of that maybe, but basically it just looks, it's got all the characteristics of a classic cyberpunk, but it's also got loads of kind of new interesting stuff, so it's just visually very stimulating, and it kind of pushes all the buttons, because my buttons anyway. I always try and just do something I'm massively excited by, and then you hope that if you're excited by it and you lavish a lot of love on it and you do it really well, then other people will get excited by it as well. And that seems to be, why people have bought my books over the years. I love cyberpunk. I sort of fell back in love with it as an adult. I fell in love with was the 80s-ness of it, which I used to find quite naff sort of in the 90s. I think, this is quite dated, all this 80s technology and all these cables and things. But now that's what I love about it. I love the fact that you can sort of posit this alternative universe where all this 80s technology and all these cables are really important. And I'm using biotechnology, so sort of plant-based, technology, biogenetics. Within the story, there's reasons why all these cables are necessary, and why everything looks like a sort of Nintendo or a sort of Sony Walkman or something. It's sort of tied into the narrative weave of the story and the city itself. And then I think the problem I have with a lot of cyberpunk is that it sort of stops being cyberpunk. It's sort of, it doesn't have enough punk. It's important to have the punk.
Right.
To me, you've got to have the detective noir, you've got to have the punk, and then you've got to keep it claustrophobic within that sort of kind of city environment. I think we all know that the original ending of Blade Runner, where they went off into the greenery, was a disaster because you're just like, what? What the hell? So it's essential to keep it, to me, within the confines of the city and within the confines of the detective murder mystery that the characters find themselves in, and then explore this world and the ramifications of this world for the humans, and they're just trying to survive. I think it resonates a lot with me and with readers because, to me, the reason why I also wanted to do this book now is because the sort of problems we face in the world today with online tech and AI and, the way the technology and the phones in our hand has changed relationships and how we kind of talk to each other and political processes and things. So really, these are all kind of cyberpunk problems, but they've kind of crept up on us in ways that we weren't expecting, very casually, without, anyone asking or anything, if this was a good idea. I think a lot of the themes that we can get into with this cyberpunk story, which is set 100 years in the future and has all these brilliant kind of visual characters and the sort of settings, the thematic kind of underpinning of it is just very resonant and really kind of, talks to me, and it talks to readers who read the book, whilst also just telling a really kind of fun, gritty detective murder mystery.
Sure. Well, I'm sorry to hear about your accident, but I'm glad that you were able to come out of it with a positive experience to create this book. So that's tremendous. So I want to dig a little bit further about your creative process. You sort of hinted about it a wee bit there, but can you tell me what comes first? Is it a script? Do you do that first? You get the script ready, 100%, and then you tackle the art, or is it a back and forth type of process?
Yeah, it's interesting. Looking at the timeline of these kind of things in my head. I think the way that I approach any world that I'm building is I very much see it as a world building and a design process. It's such an investment of time and effort to make something, and you need it to be really good in order to be successful. So I don't commit to something until I'm sort of sure I've got some kind of idea in my head of a kind of story and a tone and a kind of theme that I think is going to be really powerful and it's exciting and it inspires me. Once I've got that, then I start to draw the characters, and the characters are really important. The characters embody the soul of the comic. So if you look at the characters in Death Sentence and you look at the characters in Chrome Roses, they're just very much an articulation of everything that the comic is. I think that's really important with character design and with comics particularly. I think all the strongest characters that have resonated through time have a very unique kind of appearance that is very intrinsically tied to what the comic is about. So you think about Batman and the way he looks and moves and what his, comic is like and what it's about. You think about Spider-Man, the way he looks and moves, very unique, very sort of, he really works in New York, his environment and the stories that are told there. Yeah, I think all the great characters have this very distinct look that is very much just an embodiment of the book itself. So the other thing, of course, is that people love character art, especially in comics, and the characters are going to be on every panel and every page, and they're going to be on the covers. So if your characters are really visually exciting and different and interesting, and they embody the book, then you don't really have to do too much to kind of make the covers or the artwork or the panels interesting, because in every panel there's this really cool and interesting character or characters. I spend a lot of time designing the characters, bearing in mind that's what I used to do for computer games. So I've got a few kind of techniques to do that over the years. I've figured out processes of doing that always seem to work. Then you're always trying to find out something original, something, an original silhouette or a combination of things that you've not seen before. And then while I'm drawing the characters, when I'm starting to nail the characters, then they start to sort of talk to me. So they start to say things and I start jotting them down. So it's very much like their personality comes across from the art, and you get a feeling from the art. And then the trick is to try and distill that feeling into text and into dialogue. It's always dialogue at first. Characters will say something in your head, and then somebody will reply, and then you'll have an exchange, and you think, oh, that's actually a really nice bit of dialogue, and you sort of write that down. So by the time I finish designing the characters, I've got lots and lots of dialogue. And then, as Stephen King said, all great writing is basically editing. So, you sort of just cut out the 80% of dialogue that's kind of not great, and you use the 20% that's brilliant. And then you've got some sort of the basis of some really good scenes. And then from that, you can sort of derive the plots. Plotting, you have to study it. You have to really learn how to do plotting, and I did. So, I read a lot of, all the books and practiced and got it wrong for years, maybe 10 years. I was sort of not great at it. But after a long time of writing and plotting and practicing, you really get the knack of it. And there's really nothing you can't come up with a good story for if you know what you're doing, sort of plot-wise, and you understand how plots work and, what people are going to be surprised by and what they're not, and all that kind of stuff. And we're all incredibly sophisticated when it comes to plots and stories, because we all consume so much story-based media. And, you'll often be watching something and you're thinking, oh, I can see where this is going, or, I bet this character's actually doing this. And sometimes if it's a really good plot, what the writer's doing is they're using that knowledge to misdirect you, and actually what's going on is something completely different. So yeah, we're all pretty savvy when it comes to plots. I think if you're a good writer, then you can come up with a good plot for almost anything pretty straightforwardly. That's not the complex part. And also what I learned with my early comics that I did was, it's really not plots that really, plots are engrossing and they keep you turning the pages, but it's really sort of the characters and the theme and the sort of moments that happen during the plot. So you've got to make space to have these great moments and these great characters and these great exchanges, whilst also, keeping people turning the pages. So it's sort of like it becomes quite a technical process when you're actually just turning all your ideas into a story, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. We've been talking about two of your major projects. I'm wondering, what are your plans for the future?
Yeah, I'm very much committed. I'm loving this cyberpunk world, and it's going down quite well. Finished the first book, and I raised $35,000 for that on Kickstarter, and then got that done. And now I'm doing the second book. So it's a trilogy of books, basically. So I'm sort of deep into the second book at the moment. And then I'm going to run the Kickstarter for the second book in July. So if you look on Kickstarter for Chrome Roses, then you'll find that Monty Nero. It's got all my previous work on there as well. And that's just a really good way of people getting the books, seeing the books, raising money to make the books. And obviously, if you raise $35,000, you can do a really great job of gotten some nice variant silver foil covers, and it's, got the best binding possible. And it's just a really beautiful book. What I try and do is I just look at my bookshelf and I think, oh, what haven't I got that I'd love to read? I've got some really nice hardback books on my bookshelves, and I really want, if I put a book next to it, I want it to be as good, if not better, than those books, in every way. The story, the art, the covers, the binding, the papers, the printing. And that's what you can do these days as an independent writer and artist. You can actually create these worlds and people will find them and buy them, and then you can produce them in this really beautiful way. I feel it's a real privilege to be able to do that. The fact that people are interested in your work and they'll buy it and you get to do this stuff. I think people like myself, we're very lucky to be able to have that privilege. So I always try and do the best possible job in every respect with the art, the story, and the sort of actual printing of the books themselves. I've got a warehouse in Texas and a warehouse in Britain because I've been doing this for a while. They keep stock of all my books. The Texas team, they sort of send out to America and a lot of the places around the world and to Canada. And then the UK team does more sort of like Britain and Europe. It's just basically whatever's cheapest. And that way we keep the postage costs down for everybody as well.
Right. Wanted to ask you, with everything that you have on the go today and the future, where do you recommend that people go online to find you?
I guess when I'm online, I most often go onto Facebook. When I'm actually creating the books, I tend to just sort of post process stuff. So there's videos of me sort of drawing the comics, talking about drawing the comics, speeded up kind of pages of me kind of making the pages in the comics or airbrushing them or something. So I tend to post stuff like that because I find I'm not blessed with genius or anything, so I can only do great work if I'm really focused and I really concentrate on it. I've realised over the years I'm not great at multitasking. So what I do is I just write, and when I finish the scripts and I know exactly how the story ends and everything, then I'll just draw. And then when I finish drawing, then I'll just airbrush, and then I'll just letter, and then I'll just get the books printed. And then I'll tend to pop up online for 2 months and sort of promote the books and talk to people and sort of say, hey, you can find this here if you're interested, kind of thing. And then get back and kind of repeat the cycle. What tends to happen is you sort of get a few months of me working away on making the books where I'm just sort of posting process stuff, which people seem to like. It's quite interesting. Some of the videos are very popular. I'm always happy to talk to people about that, especially people that are as excited by comics or by cyberpunk or whatever it might be as I am. And then, like at the moment, I'll be on all the platforms, a little bit, just sort of talking to people. I don't really like talking about myself much, just because I don't think it's very good for anyone's mental health to be constantly banging on about themselves or what they're doing or what they had for tea or something. So I tend to like to talk more about what other people are doing or sort of retweet, other comics or books that I like, or, and just share a kind of enthusiasm for the medium as a whole and the kind of good work that everyone's sort of doing in different fields. I think if you remember that, we're all doing this because we love it and we all love these kind of types of genre and these types of stories and comics, and then just sort of chat about it like you would if you were with someone face to face. I find that's the best way to kind of engage and do social media. Not that I'm great at it or anything, but that just works for me.
Thanks to Monty for the chat. You can discover more about Monty on Instagram at instagram.com/Monty Nero. And thank you for tuning into the True North Country Comics Podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics Podcast website to listen to the full conversations and discover more about creators' insight on making comic books and graphic novels. I also encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media sites, and you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2025.